Today's guest is Ben Wadham, who is Assistant Professor of Sociology at Flinders University in Australia. Ben is the Director of an Australian research hub known as the Open Door that brings together veterans, public safety personnel and their families, scholars and practitioners around key research, service provision and policy legislation initiatives. As a military veteran, Ben's research is focused on the health and well-being of serving personnel and veterans. He conducts sociological and criminological research on the Australian Defence Forces and the Department of Veteran Affairs, including institutional abuse in the Australian Defence Force, veteran suicide, and veteran transition into higher education. Ben also researches men's violence prevention. He is currently Chief Investigator on an Australian Research Council grant titled Veteran Suicide, and led the first national study of institutional abuse and organisational reform within the Australian Defence Forces. Ben conceived of and led the development of the Military Academic Pathway Programme at Flinders University, which is the only foundation course for veterans in Australia.
Welcome to another episode of Moral Injury International. I'm Marty O'Connor.
And I'm Leo Quinlan from Ireland.
And Leo, can you kick off we just heard the intro with our special guest, Ben, and Ben's with us. Can you kick off there, please, and let our listeners that might be listening the first time, give them a little bit on what moral injury is?
Okay. Hello, Ben. Good evening. For people, as Marty said, who might be watching and listening to this for the first time, we're talking to you under the umbrella of moral injury. So in layman terms, and because the three of us have military connections, it might be useful to say that from a layman's point of view, moral injury can be defined where, for example, soldiers suffer some traumatic experience and are then betrayed by higher authority. For us, this over the last few years, we've learned this from many, many people. This is the key, the betrayal factor. Nobody listens. Also, moral injury is similar to post-traumatic stress, we find, but not exactly the same. Moral injury is more of an injury to the soul. It's when something happens that goes against, or you're forced to do something that goes against your moral compass, your upbringing, your beliefs, your religious environment or family environment, and so on. And then some of the side effects of moral injury, of course, are people go silent. They don't talk about it. That's the case of my own father, for example, and other veterans that I've spoken to, and their children in particular. Broken marriages, broken relationships, inability to hold down a job, discontentment, drinking a bit too much, alcoholism in the extreme cases, depression, and unfortunately suicide. And Marty and I have come across people who've suffered all of these. And just finally, I hasten to add that while we're talking about it in a military context, moral injury occurs also in every walk of life. Marty and I, over the last 4 years, we've met people in prison service, police forces, private sector, corporate sector, etc., etc. So briefly, that's just what moral injury is. And now, Ben, with your permission, we'd love to hear your story. Tell us what you want to say about yourself. We'd like to know about where you came from, what you've been doing, what you're doing now, which we understand is quite impressive. And along the way, can you ease into the moral injury factor? And we'll jump in occasionally if we have to, just to clarify something or other. But for now, Ben, it's over to you.
All right. Thank you, Leo. Thank you, Marty. Pleasure to be here. So I'm Ben Wadham. I'm a professor at Flinders University in South Australia. I served in the Australian Defence Force late 80s, early 90s. When I got out, I had some very good experiences in the Australian Defence Force, Australian Regular Army. I was in the infantry for a few years and then finished off in the military police. had some really good experiences. In fact, I wouldn't be here today without that. But at the same time, as you can in a military environment, I had some difficult experiences as well, which left me, I suppose, a bit embittered when I left the military. So I stumbled across university. Certainly came from a pretty working class sort of broken background, so didn't have year 12 or anything. Certainly had no aspirations of going to university, but that's where I landed, and spent the next 10 years really studying and sort of researching the sorts of experiences that I'd had. So that was my way of dealing with some of my own trauma, I suppose, and my own experiences, was to intellectualize them, to go to university and to research them. So actually, my undergraduate PhD, and that's on race relations in Australia. So the link there is that, when you have an experience in the military, it's hierarchical, it's command and control, it's very regimented. Of course, the military is an institution often for violence. That's what our job is. There's a very strong class system in the military too. So, commissioned and non-commissioned. So it's a very masculine environment, So that was sort of the basis of my own issues, was around the male cultures. I researched issues around culture and identity and difference and conformity and sameness, and which are all questions around how we live in a democracy, really. So, what is the place of a military in a democracy, and what is and the other question, which will become clearer as I talk more, but can we have an ethical militarism? Can we do a militarism which isn't based upon thuggery and violence and brigandry? Brigands are like rogues or mercenaries. Can we have a military that has higher values, those warrior values? And we certainly see some of that in the Defence Force, but unfortunately, you see the other side as well. And so that's been I'll come back to this more, but it's been the base. One of the big things I suppose I've done over my career is to lift the lid on military sexual assault in Australia. Around about 2003, I'm finished my PhD. I'm thinking, what am I going to research next? So I'm ready to look at the military again. And I had an interest in criminology, and I began researching the military justice system. There's a lot of reform about the military justice system at that time. My research more broadly has published a book called Warrior, Soldier, Brigand, Institutional Abuse and Organisational Reform in the Australian Defence Force. So that's that book that really lifts the lid on military institutional abuse and military sexual assault. And where I was going.
That's okay.
I'm with it. So I know you can cut this, can't you?
Yeah.
It's like a pre-record. Began researching the military justice system, and all these cases came forward to me. So there's a lot of reform of the military justice system at that time. We looked at military institutional abuse or sexual assault from 1970 onwards, although it goes way back. It's as old as militaries themselves. And there's these cycle from the 1970s onwards of sort of scandal, response by the Defence Force and the state, inquiry, recommendations, and then it falls away and nothing happens. I was interested in that particular period when they were looking at military justice as the cause of certain cultural challenges in the Defence Force. That included the look at how our courts in the military run. Then that looked at how a particular infantry battalion, the 3rd Infantry Battalion, 3RAR, turned in on itself and was plagued by rough justice for a year or so. That's where they kind of disavowed the formal military justice system and then used their own forms of rough justice. And then that led to the Senate inquiry in 2005, which was tabled around the effectiveness of the military justice system. But all that work on military justice is based around the fact that certain difficult things had happened to military personnel So these
And-
cases started coming to me, and I started.
And Ben, can I just go back a little bit there? What you said about, you're growing up with that, but what brought you into specifically about sexual harassment?
Yeah. Well, working in the infantry, I guess principally my own experience of that. Yeah. So, but it's bigger than that because I was struck by how the infantry battalion, like I said, as a real enclave of men. And we work hard and we play hard, and we think that our job's very different, so we can do what we like. There's a real license in the boys to think that they can do whatever they like, work hard, play hard, drink a lot of womanizing. So I was really struck by that culture. That's the first thing that struck me. And then I was always a bit of a lad, and I was on my subject one for corporal. That's a promotion course. And one of the forms of violence in the military is hazing violence. So it's sort of not always not necessarily malicious or about sexual gratification or anything like that. It's just about having a dig at one of the lads and playing all sorts of horrible games on people. There's a whole lot of traditions in the military around hazing and initiation. Things like, when we go to too much detail, nuggeting or stripping people down and making them run back to base, or taking them out on patrol and stripping them down and making them walk back naked. All these things. So that was my experience on the subject one. 5 guys ambush, kidnapped me, tied me up, and brutalized me for about 40 minutes. And even though it wasn't sort of about hate and about wanting to get me as a person, still it has profound effects on you. So that was the basis of that. I just pushed that away for quite a while, probably 20 years or so. But in that 20 years, I'm sort of not really aware of the effect it's had on me. So I end up researching it, and I think that's my way of, passively trying to make sense of it, or obtusely trying to make sense of it. So that's how I got into that's why the study sort of collided with my experience, if that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah. Just something occurs to me. You're kind of hitting on what we've been talking about before. You said you put it in the back of your mind that, for the want of a better way of expressing it, for quite a number of years. That's a little bit like we've discovered with people who've suffered, let's say, moral injury, that they don't talk about it. It's at the back of their minds, and maybe when they get older or something triggers it off, like a bereavement somewhere, or in the case of what we're talking about, a film comes out that talks about it. So you're kind of validating what we've been saying. I appreciate that. I'm just glancing down through something we got on the internet about yourself. You're you're involved in a wide range: veteran suicide, institutional abuse in the Australian Defence Forces, men's violence prevention. Um, it's all rough stuff and tough stuff, actually. So I suppose, asking the question, you've obviously suffered, and we don't need to go into the details, the gory details of your own particular incident or incidents, plural, if that was the case. But have you come to terms with it yet? Have you handled it well enough for yourself? And the second question is, because you're dealing with so many other people's stories, similar or worse than your own, is it very difficult for you to be involved in this type of research and helping veterans and children of veterans and so on? That's two questions in one.
Mm. Yeah, the short answer is yep, I'm in a pretty good space these days. Although, these things never, it's about management and resilience, isn't it? It's rather than sort of these things being resolved. So the experience for me was a PTS issue, but sort of moral injury issues. You know, it's massive. I mean, you have the incident. That's one thing. You feel you feel very betrayed by your peers. The other one then is you can't report it at that era that I was in. Otherwise, you become a victim or a target of the what we call the second assault. And that's where, excuse me. You become the victim of the second assault, and that's where the institution wants to close down your claim. See this a lot with women. They will report the sexual assault, and then the institution wants to say don't report, or they want to close them down, or they want to get rid of the messenger. So that is, in my research and in my experience, that's a very profound level of moral injury. Much harder to resolve than the PTS, I believe, because you've got so much invested in your whole identity is invested in being a service person. Yeah. Well, this is the thing I think is that these things collided. I ended up using my research as my way, as my catharsis, if you like. And so that worked for some time. It's not a conscious thing. You just found yourself in this research space. You're committed to it because you know the intricacies of the experiences. Everyone's experience is different, but you know it firsthand. For a period of time that worked to bring my own experiences to the surface. So it's 5 or 6, it's 10 years in, after probably 5 years in after doing the interviews, that this all comes to the head for me. And then we go through a bit of a dip, the psych, all the diagnosis treatments, the reshaping of identity. So now you've given me a few labels which I didn't have before, giving me some medication which has changed the way I live my life. So that readjustment, and then to the answer to your other question, I continue to be working in this space because that's the space I've carved out, and I've got the expertise and the empathy and the understanding. But the interviews do have their emotional labour element to them, absolutely. Just working in the space has an emotional labour element to it. Young men violence prevention. So if the logical end of that is me wanting to do research that works at the prevention end, fundamentally, I think that if we had healthy ideas of masculinity, then this stuff would be less prevalent. I think if we had more mature versions of what the warrior is, then we would
Ben.
This sort of stuff.
Ben. Sorry, Ben. You mentioned masculinity there. I noticed that one of the things that you're studying is the whole area of researching is masculinities.
Yes.
In the context of moral injury, where does this come in? I don't fully understand it.
Yeah, you talked about an element of closing things down and not talking about them. So I think one, we can talk about morality as being gendered. Yeah. So, not men and women don't necessarily do morality the same way. The military is a very masculine environment. So that means the activities we get in have a gendered element to them. And then the military institution is very gendered. It's a man's house. It's historically almost been exclusively men. And that, we need that. We need that because we need men to be able to do that sort of work. But we're increasingly seeing that women can do that too. But we can do that masculinity in better ways or less better ways, more respectful ways or less respectful ways, more ethical ways or less ethical ways. And the dominant we call martial masculinity, that means to be warlike. That's what we get educated or socialized into the military, is to be martial. It's a strong masculinity. It's a dominate, if it needs to be, it's a domineering masculinity. It means that we have to be proficient, we have to be competent, we have to be stoic, we have to get the job done, we have to be active and decisive, we have to be violent if we need to be, we have to be able to win the war. You know, the motto of the infantry is to seek out and kill the enemy. I mean, that's our job, right? So that our masculinities are bound up in that. And then back in the
Okay.
battalion, yeah,
Yeah.
I was going to say
Sorry,
back.
Ben, I'm with you. I'm with you on that. I was infantry myself for 25 years, so I kind of know what you mean. So, am I right in saying that this whole masculinity bit then is they hide people with problems, they hide it all under the veneer of masculinity, and they don't talk about things when they should. So that makes sense. And then to come on to something else you mentioned, uh, if I paraphrasing you properly about to be an investigation and inquiry, this and that, and then nothing would be done about it. This we have heard in our podcast happens in many, many other sectors and in other armies in other countries in the world. It seems to be a common trait. Deny it, delay doing anything about it, hope you die and go away kind of thing. You find the same?
Oh, absolutely. It's a hallmark. You know, I've looked at this over the Five Eyes nations. Britain just completely denies it. That is England.
Yeah.
Canada's quite engaged with it, but it has this cycle. It comes, it goes, it comes, it goes. In Australia, we had that cycle quite strong until about 2011. There was an incident there called the Skype scandal. And then this was not any really massively different type of scandal, but what happened was it really hit the media. So in the military world, in this space, we talk about military civil relations. You know, so it's not all military. Military exists with the state, with civil. So when this incident happened, civil society kind of blew up, and so did the state, and all these people from historically came out of the woodwork, and it became a national sort of affair for probably 12 months, and that changed things a little bit. But we seem to be back in the same cycle again now. We've just had a Royal Commission. Now we're waiting for those recommendations to look like they're being addressed. That Royal Commission on defence and veteran suicide is littered with these sorts of cases, and as well as deployment trauma. But moral injury is a key part of it, and we're waiting for the Royal Commission to be addressed properly. So that scandal is, some scholars call it the policy graveyard, because that inquiry happens, a lot of recommendations are made, leading to policy change, and then everyone forgets about it, nothing happens. So you end up with a policy graveyard.
Yeah, yeah. And just what we've discovered, I'm just wondering if you've discovered the same thing. You're talking about serving soldiers and veterans. I noticed it's written there about what you do. But do you have any research done, or do you relate to families of serving soldiers or family of veterans and the transgenerational effect onto their children? Does that enter into your area of interest?
Yeah, we did some research maybe 5 years ago now with families, and produced a guide for mental health and moral injury for families, for the families to understand what it means for them, but also for the agencies to understand what it means for their people. So there's a sort of a secondary, it's a moral injury, but there's sort of a secondary. It comes from the fact of living with a partner who has been with the effects of service, police,
Yeah,
fireys, or whatever, and the way in which the family is sort of caught between their grief, their mental health issues or moral injury issues in the institution, and this sort of three-way difficult relationship where the family ends up kind of getting cut out, really, and that has this kind of injurious effect upon the family. A secondary moral injury, if you like, or moral injury principle, I don't know.
yeah, that makes sense, what you're saying, because I think you mentioned 5 years. You mentioned a 5-year timeline so far. Well, in Marty's case and mine, it's about 4 years. That's when, or maybe it's coming on to 5 years now, Marty. When we heard about moral injury, and in fact, I think I was probably the first person to officially mention moral injury in Ireland, so it's grown a lot since then, or at least our knowledge of it has grown since then. And what you're saying, like, again, I'm using the word, it validates what we're finding as well, in Ireland and in other countries where we've interviewed people. Okay, so
Leo, can I just ask a question to Ben? Ben, did you find understanding what you went through and everything like that? Did you find forgiveness for, I suppose, the person that did it or peoples that did it? Did you find that knowing moral injury gave you forgiveness, or was that separate?
I'm not. I think I had to forgive the military more than those men, if that makes sense. This is about the context of the military camaraderie, really. I mean, on a training course, you're working hard, you're playing hard. I don't know, there are lots called camps, shenanigans going on. I didn't hate these men for that. And they didn't hate me for why they did it, which is the conundrum there, I think. So, the US collects data on military sexual assault, and men don't report sexually assault. Military men don't report sexual assault because they think that initiation is just part of the game. It's just what happens in the military. So I think that's part of it as well. So part of it is really more of a resentment of the military for that I couldn't process it, and I couldn't talk to anyone, and I couldn't get it managed. I had to close it down, and that led to then that much longer period of stewing on it or sitting in the background without you knowing what it was. That makes sense?
Yeah, absolutely. Leo.
yeah, I think we're getting tonight an awful lot more than we've got from other people, about the breadth of this type of activity and the moral injury factor. And we've had other people talk about individual instances that they know themselves, but you seem to have a lot of knowledge about a wider range of people who have suffered all of this, probably because of your research. And this research is ongoing now with you, isn't it, in Flinders?
Yeah.
Again, going back to something, I mean, you have to be fairly strong within yourself, Ben, and you said you're in a fairly okay place, but you have to be very strong within yourself, in your mind, having suffered something yourself, and then to be constantly dealing with it on a day-to-day basis. Do you find it hard?
I think we're running out of resilience, if that makes sense. Yeah.
You're running out of what?
Resilience. I think that
Oh,
yeah, it does take it's an emotional labor.
yeah.
And so sorry, so to put a bigger position on this, and we talked about this a bit before, Leo, but at some point in your life, it hits you, at some point in your life, the things that you're doing to hide this thing or manage it fall away, and then you can no longer keep a lid on it. And
Yeah.
I found that around my 50s, I suppose. So now, I've done around 300 interviews in this space. We've published on it. We presented the Royal Commission. Our research has been really central to a lot of things in terms of defence reform in Australia, the military culture. But yeah, the short answer is there's probably a bit of a shelf life on how long you can do these interviews.
Well, I would say that the people that you have to interview are probably very lucky to have a person like you interviewing them, because you, more than anybody else, can absolutely understand what they've gone through and are going through. So there has to be a plus factor there, despite the fact that it probably takes a toll on you. It would have to take a toll on you. It would
Yeah,
have to.
definitely, of
And
course.
in that, how do you protect yourself? How do you protect yourself?
Well, it's compartmentalize, I think is the word. So, you know, we've got
Yeah.
counsellors and psychologists that see this stuff every day. I suppose unless they're the wounded healer, they may not be there with their own experiences, but you know, you've got to carry the stuff you listen to as a counsellor too. So so compartmentalising means just being able to go, that's someone else's experience, and have full empathy for it and be fully present with it, but then being able to sort of cut off at the end and say, you know, that was an experience today. It doesn't have to bear down on me. You know, just cognitive ways of sort of putting things in place. But also then we recently, in the more recent times, started doing the interviews in pairs. And I'll be honest, we don't necessarily debrief all the time afterwards. Sometimes you just want to sit with what you've just heard, but you'll end up talking about it a week later or something. So it's good to be able to share. You know, what do they say? Shared something. Yeah.
It is, isn't it,
Yeah.
Ben? It's actually talking to somebody, as we say, whether it's a friend. I mean, I've spoken to you before the show, and we had a great chat. I'm sure you were trying to shut me off, but that didn't work very well, Ben. But the thing is, it's talking to somebody and then realizing what you're doing, all the great work you're doing, is the fact that a family member, or sometimes it's better just even outside a square, a good friend, and sharing your experiences. And by with these podcasts and what we do by talking to other people, which we see the responses, it triggers in a good way, but it makes them feel empowered to be able to speak out.
Yeah, I think you know, we talk about moral injury, and so I look at this not just as an experience, but also as a researcher. And I think that for me, morality is a dimension of identity. And why I say that is that what you've just said, Marty, is that it's just, you know, managing this stuff, understanding it, and even the morality that we bring to any situation is collective. It's not just our individual morality. And so we bring the morality of our childhood to the service, but then we're heavily trained. You know, you had different conflicts to us in Australia, but excuse me.
Yeah.
You had different conflicts where we are in Australia, but you know, in Vietnam, for example, the morality then was about the domino theory. You know, that the communists were coming down south and they're going to take over the world, and so we were that gave us the ability. We go into that war understanding that, you know, this is what communists are like, and this is what the Viet Cong are like, and our whole morality is based around that justifies our ability to kill them, to quell that group of people, you know. So that's a collective morality, and it's one that we learn in the military. And you know, that's when you go into that environment and then you see something that goes against what you've been told by the military for why you're there, creates dissonance. I'll just tell you a really quick experience, but I went to New Guinea as an 18-year-old with the infantry patrolling the missions. I'll never forget that because we you know no you know we weren't not allowed to engage. It was exercise, and but the local constabulary were just violent, just you know really hitting people and beating them. And you know, this one incident for me was when one of the police hit this young child. You know, I can hear the sound and I can see that, and so that's all this moral effect because you've been told about what to expect of the New Guinea people, and then you're 18 and you see this stuff that you've got no way of explaining, and so it's this collective morality, and and I'm getting very academic, but it's bound up in our identity about how we understand who we are, and I think of that as an identity wound. So moral injury creates these identity wounds.
Yes, I can understand that. Without mentioning any places, there's going to be an awful lot of moral injury sufferers around the world for the next generation with everything that's happening. And you kind of put your finger on it there.
Yeah.
You know, the moral compass some people have is just off the charts, you know.
Mm.
Oh, wow. The transgenerational effect, if I can come back to that, Ben, with the veterans that you're working with, or not just veterans, serving soldiers and their children, do you come across any of the moral injury going down into the next generation?
I certainly see the effects of it on the generations, when I do my interviews, and I can think of cases where I've talked to men who have lived their lives with that moral injury baggage of having a bad experience in the military deployment or domestic service. And because of the way in which they close down, because moral injury can have some PTS-like symptoms, irritability and rage and disconnection. I see that having that effect on their relationship with their children, but I haven't interviewed children about how they have managed those effects. There's been a recent PhD thesis in Australia which has been looking at that, about the effects of having fathers on children. That we definitely need more research into that space. It's not big in Australia.
Yeah.
I also sit on a children veterans board with DVA. That's where we look after the children of veterans, and giving out money for education and to supports and things. And we would see that children could become secondary, sort of into the carer role quite young, because the parents were living with unresolved issues, both PTS and moral injury.
Another question, I don't know, you're triggering things off in my mind. In, let's say, 15, 20 years ago, I was very much aware in the Irish scenario where you had people in places like Kosovo and Sarajevo and so on. And the Irish army at the time was very interested, or very much aware of the possibility of post-traumatic stress. Never heard of moral injury at that stage, but they would be checking people out in the field. They'd send people out from, let's say, Ireland to check in the field if anybody was showing any symptoms or signs of post-traumatic stress or whatever. But, and as I understand, they were all also aware before people were going out into harm's way that this might be a possibility. Does the ADF, the Australian Defence Force, are they, I'm sure they're aware of all this, but are they taking steps to educate people prior to going into conflict or places of danger about the possibility, talking to commanders, telling them what to watch for, post-traumatic stress, and of course, moral injury? Are they switched on in that way?
I guess my first thing to say is that defence is quite opaque, so you don't always know what programs they're running. But through my interviews, I've had secondhand that there's training for recruits around ethics in military service, which also includes issues around what you might expect to see and be involved in. Whether that actually addresses moral injuries, in fact, I don't know. And then there is other training for commanders, particularly officers, to be able to identify those signs of mental health stress or whatever in their people. But then there's other element, Leo, which I found in my interviews, and again, this is the kind of confounding point, is so have I got time to give just one quick example here? So I interviewed a young man who'd served in Iraq and Afghanistan. He was a section commander. And a lot of the lads that I've talked to, and they are men principally who've been overseas and come back, they come back to something called a post-operational psychological screening, POPS. Now, you'd think that would be just to be an instrument that helps you to identify if people are having issues and how you can step in to help them. But the cultural, institutional side of it is that your commanders say don't say too much, or your peers say don't say too much, because if you say too much, then you won't get another course or a deployment, or you won't get a promotion. And then in this particular case, the section commander was in that sort of environment, and the lads were self-medicating. So there was drug use amongst the company, alcohol, but also drugs. so it sort of gets shrouded and covered, and the commanders don't really want to know about it. And the boys just are trying to manage it, but then someone will come unstuck because they'll fail an alcohol test, or their performance will drop. And that's what happened in this case. This section commander had a great soldier. He turned up drunk. He ended up being a defender for that soldier, defender and prosecution. This went on for a few months, developed a good relationship, built a stronger relationship looking after this guy. And then at the last moment, the prosecutor jumped. And so they asked this guy who'd been looking after him as the defender to be the prosecutor. And so the young soldier was shattered because he was terminated without any support for his health issues. And the commander then, the section commander, was also shattered because he'd been asked to do something against, he'd gone from looking after this person to having to prosecute. And so that shattered him. So we can have all these things in place, but you've got to change that stoic, that really stoic sort of command and control culture. There's nothing wrong. You can be empathetic and you can be tough, I think, and in fact, I think empathy is tough. So the ADF is pushing it into that space. I think they're still having some trouble with the cultural change.
Okay.
Now, Lee, I'm going to let you carry on, but guys, we're running out of time. So we've got 5 minutes left.
Okay, no, I was, look, this is quite amazing, all the experiences you've had, Ben, and I can't imagine being in your situation. I'm aware of moral injury on a far lesser harmful degree, we'll put it that way, than you. Have to say I admire you and what you're doing, and you have to have a lot of inner strength to be able to do what you are doing. So just in the couple of minutes that are left, would you like to say something to people who might think they're suffering from moral injury or who know they're suffering from injury? How should they handle it?
And also mention how they can contact you as well. We will put it up.
Yeah. Well, I think number one, one of the greatest challenges with moral injury is thinking you're on your own lonesome. Because you're shut down, you don't want to talk to others. You think your experience is yours, and I think it can be inflated because you haven't been able to normalize it by understanding actually there are a lot of people in this boat. There's no shame. There's absolutely no shame in experiencing that. I experienced shame, and I guess when I had my own treatment and diagnostics back around 2015 or whatever it was, that feeling that I'm not as strong as I thought I was. I'm not on top of this as I thought I was, and I think everyone has that experience with moral injury. I think the other one is the embitterment. There's an embitterment element to moral injury, because you feel betrayed. Like your values are being betrayed, or the institutions betrayed you, and you've put so much of yourself into that. And so I think embitterment is something that we have to all seek help to resolve, but we also have to personally resolve by saying to ourselves, it's time to lift our eyes and move forward. Doesn't mean just disavow the past, but don't let the past rule your future. So I think that moral injury is a bit harder to define for people. It's more legitimate to have a traumatic experience and have that justified, but moral injury is a bit more muddy. And unless you have people on the ground or practitioners that understand that, it's a bit harder to identify and get acknowledged. The Australian Defence Force and DVA are doing well in that regard with their chaplaincy. So they are putting a lot of effort into moral injury through their chaplaincy program. My advice is, if you're in that space, your best bet is to be able to find people to talk to or to find formal counselling that you're comfortable with, because holding it in is the greatest ongoing health issue.
Okay.
Yeah, you're hurting yourself more by keeping it in.
Yeah.
Okay. Thanks indeed for all of that, Ben. That's fascinating, quite fascinating. And again, I just take my hat off to you for the work you're doing, having suffered yourself, and then to be doing this on a constant basis. You must really be inside a very strong person, mentally strong as well. So again, my compliments to you, Marty.
Ben, thank you so much for coming on. It's been an honor. And you can watch this full show on the full podcast on moreinjuryinternational.com, and you can get connected then with Ben and what he does with all his links. So Ben, thank you so much.
Thank you, Ben.
Thank you.
And thank you to our listeners here in Australia and all over the world, and we'll see you on the next episode.